1947.
It was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else.
Some believe the Roswell UFO incident is one of the greatest government cover-ups.
I always felt that the government had not disclosed everything, that there was something out there.
One man's search of the crash site may provide dramatic new evidence as to what exactly happened in the summer of 1947.
Got it, Ed.
And the Air Force reveals a top-secret project from Roswell, kept under wraps for 50 years.
A top-secret program that was considered to be as important as the Manhattan Project.
Can an Air Force investigation, eyewitness reports, and new lab tests reveal what really happened outside Roswell? Unidentified flying objects have been seen in our skies for decades. Thousands of UFO sightings have been documented in official government files. Most have logical, scientific explanations. Yet some cases remain unexplained, classified, unidentified. Can newly released files reveal the truth behind these UFO encounters? The most famous UFO story of all time is reported to have begun with a loud explosion over the New Mexico desert. Rancher Mac Brazel is one of the area's few residents. Days following the explosion, Brazel is out working on his land when, deep in the desert, he makes an incredible discovery. He finds a huge debris field of wreckage that accounts say is 1 kilometer long and as wide as a football field. What exactly Brazel finds is the controversy at the heart of the legendary Roswell story. Later, Brazel loads an assortment of pieces onto his truck. He drives to the town, Roswell, 120 kilometers southeast of the debris field. The sheriff in Roswell is just as puzzled by the wreckage as he is. He directs Brazel to the local military base, home of the Army 509th Bomber Group. The base intelligence officer is Major Jesse Marcel, who becomes a critical player in the Roswell story.
Jesse Marcel, as the lead intelligence officer of the 509th Bomb Group.
Donald Schmidt has been researching the incident for 30 years.
He would have been the #1 intelligence officer in the United States military at that time. He contacts his base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. Blanchard's impressed enough with the material that he sends out not only Major Marcel, but also his head of counterintelligence, Captain Sheridan Cabot, in the event it's something foreign.
Marcel, despite his experience as an intelligence officer, is baffled. He has no idea what this wreckage is.
Could very well be a downed aircraft, but they don't know about any downed aircraft. Nothing's been reported.
Marcel and Cabot collect some pieces to take back to the base. From the beginning, Marcel wonders if the pieces may be somehow connected to one of the first ever UFO sightings in the U.S. 2 weeks earlier.
The thing about Roswell is that it didn't happen in a vacuum.
Richard Dolan is a UFO researcher and author.
It was in the midst of a very significant wave of flying saucer sightings that were being reported over the whole western part of the United States.
On June 24th, 1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold in the Washington State area sights a series of strange, connected objects flying at supersonic speeds. He calls them flying saucers, and the U.S. government takes notice.
They were unknown, and when they're unknown, that concerns the Air Force because the Air Force is responsible for protecting the airspace of the United States.
Richard Weaver wrote the official U.S. Air Force report about the Roswell incident.
Something's flying around in there that we don't know about or can't stop or can't identify, and maybe a threat to the security of the United States.
Arnold's sighting sets off a wave of others. In the days before the Roswell incident, there were 22 documented reports of flying saucers over the U.S., Canada, and Europe.
So they wanted to find out what these things were.
Marcel reports that he may have found one of these flying saucers. Then, his superior officer, Colonel Blanchard, issues a public statement that fuels the UFO fire.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Armed Air Force has announced that flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of...
The local newspaper carries this story the next day. This is the first and last time that any government claims possession of an unknown craft they call a flying saucer. But 24 hours later, on July 8, 1947, a press conference is held, and the Army changes its story. Brigadier General Roger Ramey, Blanchard's superior officer, states that the alleged flying saucer is just a weather balloon. Major Jesse Marcel smiles for the camera, but does not say a word. As quickly as the flying saucer story hits the news, it goes away. Richard Weaver says the explanation makes sense.
Balloons, kind of like cats, don't cooperate. There was a lot of stuff being tested in Mexico at that time, very small population, and a lot of wide open space. So they could do it pretty much with impunity at the time. We sent up a balloon. And that's the end of the story.
With that, the Roswell UFO case is closed and goes quiet. And Jesse Marcel, a respected military intelligence officer, remains quiet too. His silence lasts for 30 years. Then, Marcel decides to speak out.
Jesse Marcel was the intelligence officer for the most elite military group in the world, the 509.
Stanton Friedman is a nuclear physicist and UFO researcher.
They were the guys who dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, and 2 more in Operation Crossroads the next year. Handpicked officers, high security, elite. So his testimony is vital to this story.
Friedman interviews Marcel in 1978, and he drops a bombshell.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all our activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was.
Marcel says the debris that appeared in the 1947 press conference is a tiny fraction of what he retrieved from the crash site.
The newsmen saw very little of that material, a very small portion of it. They wanted me to tell them about it, and I couldn't say anything. And when the general came in, he told me not to say anything, that he would handle it.
Marcel has another revelation. He says he made a detour home before returning the wreckage to the airbase. Once there, he awakens his wife and his son, Jesse Jr., age 11.
2 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday, July 8th, Jesse Jr. He's roused from his sleep by his father. Jess, I want to show you something. Come out to the kitchen. And all this unusual metal-like debris.
A lot of it had a lot of little members with symbols that, to me, I call them hieroglyphics because I could not interpret them, could not be read. These little members could not be broken. We even tried making a dent in it with a 16-pound sledgehammer. Still no dent in it.
According to Marcel, the most amazing piece is what he calls memory metal.
Very strange wreckage was found, which was very strong, very lightweight, like nothing we could make at the time. Memory metal, for example. Release it, it unfolds.
Jesse Marcel's testimony about memory metal and other alien artifacts opens the floodgates. In the 1980s and 90s, 62 others have come forward with stories about the UFO crash at Roswell. Frankie Rowe's father was a fireman in Roswell, who says he was sent to the crash.
They thought they were going to a crash site of an airplane, but when they got out there, it was a flying saucer.
Frankie Rowe says her father retrieved a piece of metal from the crash, and her story matches Jesse Marcel's.
It was a piece of material that was so soft that my dad could wad it up into his hand and then drop it. It had no wrinkles at all.
But it's stories of aliens and alien autopsies that make Roswell a legend. The aliens described at Roswell have become a permanent part of popular culture, child-sized, with gray, hairless skin and big eyes. Eli Benjamin was a young soldier stationed in Roswell in 1947. Benjamin claims to have seen aliens in a hangar at Roswell Army Airfield.
They were different form, smaller in body form than we are. And the smell they had was very strong. It was vomiting smell, you know. It was a very unusual smell.
Benjamin says he was given strict orders to remain silent about what he saw.
Well, as military people, if you're ordered to be silent, we try to be loyal as much as possible, because loyalty took a bunch of us to be able to win World War II.
Frankie Rowe says the threats were much more serious.
They could take us out to the desert and shoot us. And nobody'd ever find our bodies because it's a big old desert here. So nobody ever talked about it again.
The accounts have grown more bizarre over time.
The UFO itself has morphed. It gets more mythical as you go on. New things keep coming up, and new people keep coming forward after all these years. So it's become a whole industry in its own right. Roswell has endured this incident, and in fact, it's actually even grown. So it's a business now.
And that business has permanently shaped the public's perception that the U.S. government has hidden the truth about Roswell.
And I always felt that the government had not disclosed everything, that there was something out there.
Even New Mexico's popular former governor, Bill Richardson, believes in a government cover-up.
Everything seemed to be classified. I would ask questions. They'd say, well, it's classified, national security. I said, well, come on. I'm a member of Congress. What do you know? What can you tell me? And the government would just stare blankly, say nothing. And having worked in government for 30 years, I know that when the government does that, they're hiding something. Government should be more open about what's there.
Even if the U.S. government still keeps secrets about Roswell, some believe that there is only one other way to disclose the truth.
I got it hit.
The exact location of the alleged Roswell UFO crash site is not marked on any map. Rancher Mac Brazel's family has protected its exact location from curious visitors. Only a select few know where it is, and one of those people is UFO researcher Donald Schmidt. Schmidt believes the debris field was secretly cleaned up by the U.S. military in 1947.
What we have during the course of 2.5 to 3 days, you had 50 to 60 men that came out as far as in trucks, and they would line up shoulder to shoulder, even get down on hands and knees. As one of the MPPs described to us, their orders were, if it doesn't move, bag it.
Even if the site was scoured, some believe there may still be pieces from the UFO in the Roswell desert. And one man is determined to prove it. Frank Kimbler is a geologist and earth science professor in New Mexico. He's the first researcher to conduct a systematic metal detector sweep at the alleged site of the Roswell crash.
It's too remote. It's clean. And so the things that you get in a metal detector are the types of things that might be odd, especially since this area is the debris field from the crash site. So the potential for finding something is really good because it has not been contaminated.
At Roswell, finding artifacts is not easy.
I have been out here many times in the past, searching the area for hours on end.
After nearly 70 years and a purported secret cleanup, is there any chance of Kimbler ever finding Roswell debris? Another mysterious crash site may provide clues. In 1986, a well-documented crash of an object happened in a mountainous area near Bakersfield, California. Secrecy of the event by the military leads to public speculation that the crashed object may be extraterrestrial, like with Roswell.
In many ways, this incident parallels the classic UFO crash stories.
Peter Merlin is an investigator who has visited over 100 crash sites.
An unknown vehicle crashed in a remote rural area. The government took control of the site, and security was extremely high. Armed guards everywhere, controlled perimeter, no-fly zone.
The incident is later declassified. A secret report reveals it is not an extraterrestrial craft, but an F-117, the famed stealth fighter.
The stealth fighter represented at that time the pinnacle of military aviation technology. It was absolutely cutting edge, an airplane that was virtually invisible to radar detection. The Air Force didn't want pieces of that falling into enemy hands. It was imperative that they try to clean up as much as possible.
The site of the crash is a treacherous mountain, miles from any human settlement or road. Merlin knows the military swept the site. Now, he wants to find out if anything has been left behind.
At the time this airplane crashed, it was a top-secret special access program. They tried to clean up the site, but as you can see, it's very rugged terrain. Steep mountainous canyon with lots of rocks. They had a couple hundred guys out here working in the dead of summer. A lot of rattlesnakes, heat.
The Bakersfield crash seems like a mirror image of what happened outside Roswell in 1947. Merlin scans an area near the edge of the debris field. Almost 3 decades later, the chance of finding anything seems impossible. But then, Merlin gets a hit.
Got something here. Yep, here's a piece. Looks like a piece of aluminum.
Then another. And another. Merlin finds over a dozen pieces.
Got a little piece of aluminum structure here. If the Roswell incident involved the crash of an actual space vehicle, I would expect that you would be able to go there today and find physical evidence. If you can find pieces of a known black project, surely you can find pieces of a UFO.
Merlin's results suggest that artifacts may still exist of whatever crashed in the desert near Roswell in 1947. Working in a grid, Kimbler searches an area he has never examined in the past.
All right, got it hit. Got a nice clean ping on this, so it doesn't sound like iron, so I need to dig it up, see what's there. It's in that one. There we go.
This tiny piece of metal could be a major discovery. It appears to be distressed and distorted, maybe as a result of high-speed impact. Frank Kimbler thinks so.
So that's what's exciting about this, when you come out here and find pieces like this that might be from a spacecraft. Now we have some proof in hand, and it goes back to a lab to be tested, and it just doesn't get any better than this as far as science is concerned.
Is this a random piece of metal, or the first hard evidence of an extraterrestrial craft? A special lab test may solve the mystery.
Today is a wonderful day.
Outside of Roswell, New Mexico, geologist Frank Kimbler has discovered a tiny piece of metal in the desert at the location where an object is reported to have crashed in July 1947, the famed Roswell UFO incident.
I think it's fantastic.
It's a crucial discovery. The metal is distressed and melted, perhaps from a high-speed impact or violent explosion. Kimbler decides to submit the sample for a series of scientific tests to possibly determine what exactly crashed near Roswell.
You know what? The next thing we need to do is we need to take this into a lab and we need to get it tested to find out exactly what it is and hopefully find out where it came from, which is the key point.
He sends it to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. Dr. Mike Spildy is a scientist who studies minerals from extreme environments, including Mars. His objective is to determine whether this metal is from Earth or some other solar system. He mounts tiny fragments on an epoxy disc. He then puts the sample in an electron microscope. Results are displayed on a monitor in real time. Dr. Spildy looks carefully at the readout. He consults a chart of known alloys.
Look for fairly high concentration of manganese. So we've got one there. Then we want to match up with silica and magnesium.
The results are unclear at this point. The artifact is some kind of aluminum alloy and contains a significant amount of magnesium. It's the magnesium that could hold the secrets to where this piece of metal is from.
Magnesium isotopes are kind of a chemical signature.
David Thomas is a scientist at New Mexico Tech.
If you had some spaceship from another star system that was made of magnesium and it crashed on Earth, its magnesium content would be different. It's like a fingerprint. So we use isotopes to identify strange materials.
An isotope test will determine the exact physical makeup of the piece of metal. This will then reveal whether it comes from this planet or another galaxy. The source of the Roswell event has been debated for over 50 years, and many people have strong views on the incident.
My opinion is, one, something did happen.
Former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson does not believe the report has released all the facts.
Secondly, what is that something? I believe some entity came into Roswell and crashed there. Was it a living entity? I'd say the odds are yes, but I don't have the facts. This is why the government should get this out.
Demands for a reopening of the case reached a fever pitch after Jesse Marcel claimed that the debris was not a weather balloon. Finally, bowing to pressure from Congress, the U.S. Air Force officially reopened the case of the Roswell UFO crash. Colonel Richard Weaver led the official U.S. government investigation on Roswell in 1994.
I did go into this with really open, reasonable mind. I wanted to be part of something that would probably be one of the greatest things in history. How cool would that be?
Weaver says his orders were to investigate all possibilities, no matter where the evidence led them. One of the first explanations for the crash is a top-secret project inherited from Nazi technology.
At the time in New Mexico were a number of captured V-2s and their variants that we took from the Germans, so we looked at that. Are these V-2s that went awry?
The V-2 is the world's first long-range missile, developed by the Nazis and seized by the U.S. immediately after the war. Weaver's team investigates whether a secret V-2 crashed near Roswell.
Because it wasn't a very reliable rocket. It was kind of a, point and shoot and hope that it landed kind of where you wanted it to.
But they can find no evidence. One more possible explanation is another top-secret project in the New Mexico desert.
We looked at a nuclear accident because the 509th at the time was the only people in the world that had nuclear weapons. So it was a pretty big deal to see if something had gone wrong involving a nuclear weapon, and there was nothing there.
With no evidence of a downed missile or radioactive debris, Weaver's team looks into unusual captured experimental aircraft.
There were German aircraft developers that had advanced aircraft that the Nazis had been working on that we wanted to get our hands on, the Russians wanted to get their hands on. They looked at those to see if this possibly could have been something that had been exploited, but there was just nothing out there to support any of that kind of conjecture.
The Air Force investigators examine classified government files, Air Force records, and interview witnesses and experts. Yet they come no closer to an explanation of the strange events outside of Roswell. Weaver's initial report did little to refute the account of first-hand witness Jesse Marcel, who denies the official story that the Roswell crash was a weather balloon.
Certain of being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was.
Experts on both sides agree that something crashed near Roswell. What it is still a mystery to be solved. And Roswell is not the only alleged UFO crash site. A more recent event happens in Pennsylvania and pits documents and eyewitnesses against the official military story.
The military were everywhere.
Roswell is the most famous UFO incident in history. And the most controversial.
This was cut up. This is the best special access program in the whole world.
The man who led the investigation says there has been no government conspiracy.
It takes incredible amounts of money, incredible amounts of time, and surprisingly enough, incredible amounts of documentation to keep stuff secret.
Donald Schmidt, who has conducted 600 interviews with eyewitnesses, says Weaver's report conceals the truth.
The amount of suppression alone demonstrates that something extraordinary happened out here. And we're only left with eyewitnesses. But isn't that what history is all about? Eyewitness testimony.
Eyewitness testimony is key to another UFO crash, one of them the much clearer that can help shed light on the Roswell incident. 5 years after Roswell, the U.S. Air Force starts a program called Project Blue Book to investigate the UFO phenomena.
Blue Book was an effort by the Air Force to find out what these phenomena may have been and if they were any kind of threat to national security.
One of the most compelling of the 12,000 official Air Force files relates to a UFO sighted over Canada and the Great Lakes states in 1965. It's known as the Kecksburg Incident. There are 42 pages in Project Blue Book with details on the event, and there are eyewitnesses who can still recall what happened that day.
The event happened late on the afternoon of December 9th, 1965.
Stan Gordon was 16 at the time. He has been researching the incident ever since.
There were multitudes of eyewitnesses from Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania that observed this brilliant fireball moving across the sky. And that object, whatever it was, came in over the greater Pittsburgh area and reportedly fell in a wooded ravine very close to where we're standing outside of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania.
Within the Project Blue Book report, it says the military searched the area and found nothing. The official explanation for the object is that it's a meteor.
Check there.
In 1965, I was out cruising in my convertible when I heard on WHJB that something had landed in Kecksburg.
Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all...
I come down the hill through Kecksburg, and there were some people standing alongside a farm road. I stopped and asked what had happened, and they said, well, back this road, something had landed.
Is that where you come from there?
And I looked through the field into the woods, and I could see where had tore up the underbrush and the trees as it landed. And I could see a bluish light, like a welder's light, that was getting bright and then real dull. And it continued to do that the whole time I was here.
Eyewitnesses say the military moved in quickly and forcefully,
You're going to have to move off.
under the command of men in plain clothes.
The military were everywhere. They were going in every which direction.
This road is closed.
They were being positioned throughout the fields, along with the state police. And then after that, the state police and the military come up, and they told everyone to leave.
Just get into your vehicle and move on. Why? It's a free country.
And being 19, I didn't want to leave. I asked them why, and they told me that if I didn't leave, they would confiscate my car.
All right, I'm going.
And turned around, I got in my car.
Eyewitness accounts sound nothing like the official explanation of a meteor. Witnesses described the object in the woods as a large, solid, metallic object shaped like an acorn, big enough for a person to stand inside.
They're estimating from the debris around it that this thing is maybe 10 to 12 feet or more in length, approximately maybe 8 to 10 feet or so in diameter. And of course, what's interesting is that back part, with what they call the ring area, the bumper area, it's raised up on the back of the acorn. Raised up on that were these unusual markings that look more like symbols in writing.
Then, witnesses like Weaver recall men dressed in moon suits carrying a large wooden box.
They was carrying a box about 4 to 5 foot square. And they walked down through the field into the woods toward this blue light that was flashing off and on. But when I left, they hadn't come back out yet.
Weaver is one of numerous witnesses who recall these events, all telling the same story, and some believe that there is physical evidence to prove it. And one witness says he even saw the military remove an actual UFO. In 1965, an unidentified flying object falls in rural Pennsylvania. The U.S. government's official explanation is that it's a meteorite. UFO researcher Stan Gordon has spoken to 6 people who saw the object, and all say it was something else. Mike Slater was 14 years old at the time. All that remains of his childhood home are the steps where he had an encounter with the military.
I was sitting on the steps of my home when we heard that there was a possible landing on top of Kecksburg Hill. And as I was sitting there, I had noticed a Jeep coming into town.
The military Jeep stops right in front of Slater's house.
And he said to me, had there been a lot of people asking for directions where the site is? And I went, well, yes, they have been, and I've been giving them directions. Well, he said, you could do your country a great service if you would not give them directions, or if you did, just don't send them up there. So I didn't. I either said no, or I gave them wrong directions.
Hours later, Slater says he sees the military removing a large object.
On the flatbed was a tarped object, which was sitting more toward the front of the truck, and it wasn't going that fast. It went by, and I got a great view of it as it left town.
The U.S. military denies recovering an object from forest in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in 1965. Dr. Ray Hicks was a professor of forestry for 40 years. In 2003, he was invited to examine the alleged crash site.
I was given some photographs, and as I looked around, I found one of the trees that was in the photograph.
Hicks identifies the tree today that is located at the center of the crash site.
You see that tree right there is this one. Mm-hmm. This tree right here, which was also apparently decapitated, something happened to knock the top out of it, that tree has broken down and fallen over.
He discovers only a few isolated trees damaged in a narrow area in the woods.
I tried to establish what the path was that the object took through the woods, and then I found some trees that had damage to their top. In fact, the top had been broken out.
Core samples taken from the trees put a date on when they were damaged.
And I noticed that a very dramatic decrease in growth occurred in a given year. And it turned out that that was 1965.
Hicks believes the rings of the trees prove that something catastrophic, like a crash, happened in this forest in 1965.
So if we're looking at some type of weather event, whether it be an ice storm, a tornado, even a microburst, you would think there would be more extensive damage, but it seemed to be isolated just at that path where the tree damage was.
That tree experienced a very dramatic reduction in growth right at the year that this object had fallen here.
But after decades of searching, no other artifacts have ever been found in the forest in Kecksburg. Was it simply a meteor, as Blue Book reports, or something that required top-secret military action? For the Roswell incident, a special lab test on a piece of debris may uncover evidence of an unearthly origin.
Which would then obviously involve interstellar travel.
And the U.S. Air Force reopens the Roswell case with a new revelation to the famous UFO story.
It was a top secret program that was considered to be as important as the Manhattan Project.
A tiny piece of metal found in the New Mexico desert may shed light on what actually and famously crashed outside of Roswell in 1947. Electron microscope analysis determines that the sample is aluminum alloy and contains a significant amount of magnesium. That magnesium can now be put to a pinpoint precise isotope test that will determine the exact origin of the metal found near Roswell. Trent University, near Toronto, Canada, agrees to conduct this highly specialized test. Geoscientist Bastian Gayor says the test will conclusively determine whether or not the sample is extraterrestrial.
The question would be really, if you find something that's very abnormal, doesn't fit what we typically see on Earth or typically see in meteorites from our solar system, could this be an indicator for magnesium being derived from another solar system, which would then obviously involve interstellar travel?
The science behind the test is to chemically isolate the magnesium content in the metal into pure liquid form. Then Dr. Gay can analyze it to discover its origin. He has included 2 other samples in his test. One is a piece of aircraft aluminum that is known to have come from a U.S. military plane in the 1940s. The other is a common soda can.
For good measure, we throw in a soda can. We just wanted to make sure that maybe these artifacts that have been discovered are not just cans that were lying in the desert for 50 odd years.
The results arrive in real time on a computer screen. The key question is, are the magnesium isotopes from Earth? Dr. Gayor examines the results closely. The science is conclusive.
So the magnesium isotope composition of all these 3 pieces is identical within error. They're all plot in the range of what we would typically see on planet Earth.
The fragment found at the site of the Roswell crash is not extraterrestrial. The question remains, what is it? Dr. Michael Spildy has performed further analysis on the fragment and discovers that the material is not what you would expect to find in the middle of the desert.
High tensile strength, construction of aircraft structures. So it's basically aircraft aluminum.
Dr. Spildy even put an approximate date on the alloy.
Developed in 1935.
The material predates the Roswell incident by just over a decade.
Certainly be military type aluminum. Seems more likely some type of a military aircraft, perhaps.
The fragment seems to be from an aircraft aluminum developed in the 1930s. It could be from an unknown plane crash or a piece of military equipment, but it's definitely not evidence of an alien spaceship. Frank Kimbler is disappointed, but not discouraged. He will continue to look for evidence of whatever may have crashed near Roswell in 1947.
I don't give up. I've never given up on anything, and I'm certainly not going to give up on finding Roswell artifacts.
But some feel the case has already been closed. In 1994, the U.S. Air Force discovers new information of a once classified project in their files. A project that will forever change their official story of Roswell. Its codename, Project Mogul.
Project Mogul was a top secret program that was considered to be as important as the Manhattan Project. We were concerned that the Russians were going to detonate a bomb. So this was a program to use balloon-borne sensors in order to monitor the Soviet Union to determine if a nuclear test had been conducted. At the time, it was considered to be category A1 top secret, because we didn't want the Russians to know that we were monitoring them.
A Mogul balloon is actually an array of kite-like objects and instruments, and it's an incredible 700 feet long. Weaver's team thinks they discovered the smoking gun. A molar ray test flight, early June 1947, out of Alamogordo, New Mexico, went missing.
Number 4 fits the parameters of when this material was found. Roswell brought this in the first week of July of 1947.
Could this be what rancher Mac Brazel found in the New Mexico desert in 1947?
A mogul balloon to say it was a balloon is kind of a misnomer because it's a balloon train. Sometimes these things were as tall as the Eiffel Tower.
Part of the balloon structure is what's called a Ray 1 target, which appears similar to the materials found by Brazel.
Ray 1 target is about yay big. It's very silvery. It's a metallic substance, but it's like on parchment type of paper or material. Almost kind of leathery feeling. You know, it's not easily ripped like tinfoil that you get at the store, but it wasn't this miraculous springback thing that's been described.
5 decades after the Roswell incident, the U.S. Air Force declares in Weaver's report that the crash was a covert spy balloon project that needed to be kept secret. Could this small piece of metal come from the top-secret mogul balloon project that the U.S. Air Force says crashed near Roswell?
The material wasn't rigid. It's not a piece of aluminum as we'd think of like aircraft-grade aluminum. That's not part of that assembly at all. It was more like a foil over a piece of parchment.
Weaver wrote the Air Force's official report that concludes the object that crashed outside of Roswell is a spy balloon.
As we went through, we had to go where the evidence took us. So I'm satisfied with what we found.
Many continue to believe the U.S. government is still hiding the fact that an extraterrestrial craft did crash near Roswell, and a massive cover-up continues.
Unless officialdom comes up with a better explanation than a balloon with a radar reflector, I'm sorry, don't insult me, and don't insult every one of those people who were involved back in '47, who were experienced and trained enough to be held responsible for the atomic bomb, but then they couldn't identify a balloon device.
The U.S. government says it has released all its files on the Roswell incident. Still, the most famous UFO crash of all time remains the most controversial.
It's the Air Force and the military and the national security apparatus that inexplicably keeps this classified without fully disclosing what happened.
In Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, eyewitness testimony and forensic evidence also conflict with official government accounts of a UFO incident, even better documented than Roswell.
Get the facts out. Just be transparent. Be open. That's all I'm saying.
Despite official reports, some still claim the objects crashed near Roswell and Kecksburg remain unidentified.